recording.
Reli TV. Hello everyone. My name is Matthew Blum. I am a part of the Reli Student Organization. Where we're putting together this club for a discussion with both both alumni, one faculty member, and a graduate student to kind of paint a picture as to what you should expect post-graduation from being a Reli minor or major. And so I would like, clap, please clap. Round of applause. Thank you. All right. And so if you would just each introduce yourself, say your name, and kind of just your general background.
Yeah, sure. So George Pernodal, I'm a 2010 religious studies major, history minor, and we're glad to be here. So appreciate y'all having us. Let's see. So my current occupation is that I am a management consultant at Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a large consulting firm whose client base is largely the United States federal government. I work in the healthcare space. I've done that for about 5 years now. And in addition to that, I'm an adjunct faculty member at Phoenix Library.
Hi, my name is Dina Chintram, and I'm a second year of my PhD program in religious studies. And my focus is on ethnography of religion. I look at a small community on the island of Mauritius. If you don't know what it is, where it is, it's a small island in the Indian Ocean by Madagascar. And it's a small Indian Catholic community that I'm hoping to do field work in a few years. So I'm really happy to be here.
Hi, my name is Richard Gravert. I was a religious studies major many years ago. And I'm currently a postdoc at Lambert Comprehensive Cancer Center in HPV vaccine research.
Hi, David Lambert. I'm currently a faculty member here at the Department of Religious Studies, and I'm the director of undergraduate studies this year. And I mostly teach Hebrew Bible and its history of interpretation. Been at UNC, I think about 12 years now. So love it and happy to talk to you all.
All right, thank you for those lovely introductions. I guess I have a question for Dr. Lambert. So what would be one reason why, or you can get several reasons, I'm not holding to any number of reasons, I know you probably have many, as to why someone should be, a prospective student should be a religious studies major or minor.
Sure. Well, I mean, the first thing I think to realize, and this is really why we wanted to invite alumni and also a graduate student of ours who's had her own experiences finding a career, is to realize that undergraduates, when they're imagining what they're going to be doing, really can't really know. You can't really know what it's going to be like upon graduation. The job market itself has changed incredibly over the past 10 years. We have the Great Recession, we have the pandemic. It's very hard to know what the conditions are going to be, but even more than that, it's hard to know how one is, as an individual, going to fit into the various sorts of circumstances, experiences that you're going to have after college as well. So to be prepared for a postgraduate life is not such a clear thing what that means. A lot of undergraduates kind of imagine it almost linearly. They have a certain career they imagine they're going to go into, so they work backwards. Okay, what would be the single major that would be most useful for getting you there? And that could be legitimate. There's something to be said for that. But the problem with that is, particularly if one pursues just a sort of a major that's clearly pre-professional, is maybe that's not where you're passionate. Maybe that only teaches you a very specific skill set, and it turns out you're going to need a broader set of other skills as well. So what something like a Reli major can do, and I would say this about other majors in the humanities as well, so I'll also say it's something specific to religious studies as well. But what a Reli major can do is it can give you a whole series of skill sets that you might not, develop if you're otherwise just thinking in the strictly pre-professional role. So what I advise my students to do is that instead of doing a second major or minor that's similar to the primary major that they're doing, that's contiguous. So let's say a pre-med, you're going to do biology and chemistry. That is not really going to do much for you, frankly. Medical school is going to be much more interested in you having done something very different. It's going to give them it's going to give them a way of remembering you or your first job, whatever, whichever it is, something to think of you. It's going to give you something to talk about, but it's also going to give you skills that are going to be valuable in the real life world of further schooling and first jobs, second jobs, and so on and so forth. In terms of religious studies itself, that's the biggest reason is that it just happens to be a fantastic department. I just have to say, my colleagues are unbelievable. They're fantastic pedagogues. They really care about the students. They're able, because we're a relatively large faculty, but a relatively small major, we're really able to provide individual attention. The centerpiece of our curriculum are these small seminars where you get a lot of face time with the professor, and they just really do care in a way that it might be hard to find with some of the larger majors. In addition to that, it's interdisciplinary. So you're getting you're getting exposed to a lot of different kinds of things, from, for instance, ethnography, to textual study, to archaeology. So you're getting a lot, and it's global. So you're really getting a global perspective. You're getting good insight into what's going on in America, but not only. You're getting that in conversation with the global, more global view. And it really, I think, because we're studying religion, and we have to learn how to speak with understanding about people and beliefs that are different than our own, it really gives you an ability to navigate difference. And that's super important, whether you're going into a medical field or a business field or journalism or any one of a number of careers, to be able to articulate what somebody else thinks without entering into judgment immediately, right? To be able to just understand that and respect that and enter into it as a conversation. I think that's just so important. It really lies at the heart of what we do in all of our courses.
Oh, I couldn't have said it better. This is kind of more of a question for the alumni, graduate student. What kind of during your whether postgraduate or undergraduate career kind of led you to religious studies?
I was one of the double majors, so I majored in biology and religious studies. I often got asked if I was confused by other students. But I chose those two majors, one because the classes offered in the religious program, they were really interesting. I was passionate about them, solving that question. And in high school, I decided I wanted to be a bioethicist, so I kind of figured that will work out. And spoiler alert, what you decided when you're like 17 years old, that doesn't necessarily work out the way you're envisioning. But that said, I stuck with my religious studies major all 4 years. I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it. And it enabled me to think in different ways than provided by my biology major. That taught me a lot of knowledge, and it's great. But the religious studies major definitely allowed me to talk about differences and navigate certain conversations and see things from different perspectives and understand some of the decision making and the forces that go into science discussions and political discussions around science. Looking at that through my religious studies lens was really helpful.
So on the island that I grew up, on the street that I grew up, there is one Hindu temple for Hindi-speaking Northern Indians, and a second temple, Hindu temple for Southern Indians, and then a Catholic church, and then a block away there's a mosque. And so that tells you the vision of how Mauritius is. And I was always fascinated by religion or religions. Like, what drives people to wake up at 6 in the morning to go to the Hindu temple and to go and do namaz in the mosque and to the Catholic Church, and seeing it in a cosmopolitan society of where ethnicity, race, and all of these issues that comes up, and yet people still want to do this thing that we call religion. I didn't realize that how much I wanted to do it as a professional aspect of my life. It was just part of me. So I had a very interesting background where I ended up majoring in graphic design and loved it. And during that time, after my BA, I was able to attend a conference at the American Academy of Religion, AAR. A friend of mine was presenting. And that's when it hit me that I've been immersing into all these aspects of religion, especially ethnography, field work, and I've always loved it. And to be able to see scholars presenting papers, talking about this thing with so much passion, gave me a boost of what I wanted to do in the next chapter of my life. So that's how I came to it, maybe a little bit later, but I think I'm really grateful that I was able to be exposed to that conference. That was the catalyst for me.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's really great to hear y'all's answers. It's interesting to know more about y'all. I'm going to give a slightly different answer in that I think, so I transferred to UNC after 2 years at Walker College, where I had been a student athlete, and I think I was an athlete student in that sort of order. And I had experienced a couple injuries in my second year, and decided that, you know, I wasn't gonna stick with tennis, and I was gonna move on. So I came to UNC to sort of try to rebuild my life or my vision for what my life was gonna be. And I remember walking home, and I was gonna be a chemistry major because I really thought that was the path to being successful and like a lot of people in my family. And I remember calling my dad and being like, you know, they have all these opportunities in chemistry and it's so great. And I was on sort of cloud nine. By about the first semester, I realized I wasn't very good at chemistry, which is a realization which stinks, you know, at your junior year. It's better to learn that in your freshman year. But I wasn't doing that well in school. And so I sought out other sort of areas where I was interested, and I was very active in religious communities. I come from like a pretty evangelical, I was involved in pretty evangelical groups here, and so I spent a lot of time reading a lot of religious literature. Most of it sort of popular literature, but wanted to sort of take classes and things I cared about. So enrolled in religious studies classes, and actually took a couple classes with Seaman, who was very influential to me. And what I found was that there was a different environment in the religious studies classes where it's more welcoming, smaller classes. And I remember taking a class with Lauren Reeve, and I sort of in the class just blurted out, you know, hey, my life's sort of falling apart. I don't know what I'm doing. I need to figure out who I'm going to be. And I found that the professors here were open to that conversation in a way that other areas I didn't feel like there was resonance there. So I'd say the reason I'm a religious studies major is professor faculty. It's also because I wasn't very good at chemistry. And it's because Seaman classes are really interesting. You can take them every semester. I think there's no better experience that you can see than doing that. So, up there.
Very inspiring. I know I am. I think a good question to ask at this point would kind of be during whether it's kind of your job, like a hiring process, or applying to kind of postgraduate programs. What aspects of your religious studies degree think helped you the most? when like in an interview or on a resume. You can take time to ponder that.
So I have a colleague that says, in a hard question to ask by one of our executives, she'll say, I'm thinking. So I think we're thinking. We'd like to take it.
I'll be a politician and answer a slightly different question. In applying to other programs, I first I did a JD and PhD out of undergrad. And I think the religious studies major on my resume with the biology was interesting because I wasn't just another philosophy major. I was coming from a little bit different angles. Maybe that helps me to be high or ethical lawyer. But I would say in my career so far, my religious studies major has kind of shown up in unexpected ways. My dissertation topic, I looked at contraceptive use decision making in Senegal. And as an undergrad, I had taken Professor Sufism class. And I was thrilled to see, Sufism is it's the main religion in Senegal. And I was able to incorporate that into my dissertation and talk about different levels in society that influence contraceptive decision making, religion being one of them, able to pull apart the influence of individual religious leaders on those decisions. So I used that in my dissertation was in Caribbean, and I actually presented it at a conference in Rwanda. It was very cool. And now I do a lot of vaccine research, and I'm a social scientist, not a bench scientist. And mostly I look at vaccine communication and decision making. And right now, especially, it's a hot topic in religious exemptions and decisions about vaccines coming into play again. And I'm writing a paper about some vaccine mandates right now. So religion has again come into my very science-based life, and I'm using my.
Are you ready now?
Yeah, I'm good, I'm good.
Okay.
So it's an interesting question, and because I'd say that in my profession, the fact that I studied religion is not really a conversation most of the time, and it's an interesting point on my resume that is largely just sort of looked past, because in my field that's, while interesting, it's not doesn't, it's not a pre-professional degree in a way that companies try to sort of screen for talent through pre-professional degrees. So the thing that I'll say is that there are two comments that executives make frequently because of the way that we win business. We win business through responding to proposals, which are in the government space upwards of 200-300 pages, and they're written in a month. And they always say that we need better writers and we need better storytellers, and then we hire someone. But generally, I think what you see is that your ability to sort of narrate, understand, read, understand, narrate, and even sort of analyze your own reaction to something, and then be able to write very clearly is a skill that every company needs, and every profession needs, whether they formally acknowledge that or not. And the other thing is that storytelling generally, whether that's use of that scene, every field is grappling with better storytelling, because it turns out that people in the world navigate the world through stories more than they navigate the world through facts. And so storytelling becomes something that we see frequently over and over again, even every day as I'm preparing slide decks to talk to my clients about, some unrelated issue. So those are two things from the legislative discipline that I think
Great, cool. For kind of graduate programs, what would be kind of one piece of advice you give kind of a senior undergraduate thinking to continue his academic career, whether in religious studies or a different program that's kind of either related or not?
master's, I actually did it in history and looked at this American-born religion, and it's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormons, in Mauritius. And so I was doing history of religion. And I think looking back, I appreciate getting that expertise coming from a historical background and being able to get into the program of religious studies. And I'm not the only one. There are other students who have majorly have an MFA or I think MA in history. So that tells you that you can come from different other degrees and be able to show your capacity in thriving in religious studies program. And I really appreciate the USC program here where they do give this opportunity that there's a pathway to, if you're coming from a different degree, as opposed to a religious degree, of what you could do about it. And that made a difference for me. And my other advice is to, if you want to go into the path of getting a PhD in religious studies, make sure you are finding the right schools, but more than that, you connect with the professors that you think you might want to work with. I mean, with the pandemic, we've seen how we can do so much throughout Zoom and connecting, letting them know who you are, reading their work and what they're doing, engaging and have those conversations are so important. I didn't know anyone at USC when I was looking for a school until I met Professor Lori Matthew Kipp. And she knew that I was doing ethnography and that I was looking at an island, so diasporic studies, and it involved Catholicism, it involved India and Hinduism. And she said, you should just go check out UNC program. And she connected me with the professors. And through that, I actually came on campus and met with them and asked if I could sit in their classes and came and just wanted to get a feel. And so you want to do your part if this is where you want to go and let them know who you are and what that's something that I think is more important that we don't think of as networking and connecting.
Any other thoughts on this question? Maybe it's a question for Dr. Lambert. What do you think is something about the religious studies department compared to other humanities programs that equips you for professional work?
I did,
You mentioned storytelling,
Right,
be able to kind of see the global differences and everything.
I did think of something, just general advice in terms of your previous question, and I'll answer that one too.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
In terms of things that you can do, and if you are planning on graduate school of any sort, one of the things that's really important, and I think most students are aware of this, but sometimes catches up with that is getting recommendations, right? And that's another thing that really, in a smaller department like religious studies, you have the relationships. I mean, a lot of other departments, the relationships aren't there. And it does put you at a disadvantage in terms of, frankly, I mean, that is a potential, it's a potential issue with UNC as a big public university, right? You don't necessarily, if you're competing with people from smaller liberal arts colleges, they are going to have closer relationships with faculty. And there is something really powerful about having someone kind of personally be able to attest to your qualities in classroom. So I mean, we'll get requests from students who aren't actually even majors or minors, but who have happened to take one of our seminars. And if they stood out, I mean, this is only one seminar, but usually we even then have the kind of relationship where we're able to speak to them. So we do get lots of those kind of requests for letters. But that is something that's important to keep in mind. I mean, I think I spoke to this a little bit before, but I think anyone who's graduated from our department just has a broader way of looking at the world, right? They're aware of that they're gonna have that global awareness. They're also going to have an awareness of how ideas are up for grabs. Right? A lot of the ideas that we live by, we assume to be natural, inevitable, universal parts of our lives. In fact, when you've studied history, when you've studied religion, when you've studied different geographies, you very quickly realize that ideas are specific to cultures. And that can be extremely important when trying to navigate a world in which ideas are ultimately contested. Simply being able to understand and step back from some of these arguments and understand why there are arguments and how there are these different streams of thought that are coming together and colliding every day in American politics, every day in economic policy. Things such as that is extremely valuable. And frankly, I really can't think of I mean, you can do it through history as well, for example. But in a very deep way, religious studies gets at the ideas that animate people, right? We're not just, so, and that's why I ultimately actually ended up in this field. I grew up myself, secular context. My family escaped right at the start of World War II from Vienna. They were Jews living there, and the Jews in Vienna were very secular. But their religion was music and psychoanalysis, and in fact, I had both in the family. And so I grew up without any religion whatsoever. When I got to college, I thought maybe I'll do psychology. And psychology was very interesting to me, but it felt limited in the kinds of claims it could make. So while the results could be very interesting, it couldn't kind of really get to the deep ideas that necessarily animate people, that people live by. Philosophy was very interesting to me as well, but it always seemed to me to speak a language, a kind of normative language, which was not necessarily what everyday people lived by either. They weren't necessarily aware of philosophical arguments. But religious studies was really getting at the very heart of the concepts that people lived by. And I think that's what excited me so much about it. And I think you have a facility with the ideas that matter to people and being able to deal with them after major studies, and you take that with you then work there, whether it's Senegal or where have you. Yeah.
I guess as another question, just as a quick question, do you have any of you have a favorite memory or kind of experience taking a religious studies class, doing something involving religious studies? A favorite teacher?
I mentioned Professor Ernst's small class before. That was really interesting course. I also took at least 3, maybe 4 classes with Professor Stiers, who's also a lawyer, so I think that's something I through paths. But really enjoyed a lot of his courses. He brought some of the more like philosophical ideas, but without the kind of dragging or like philosophy. But then that spiced up a little bit through a religious studies major, those courses as well. And I did take one archaeology course that was completely different from anything that I was studying, but it sounded really interesting, and I ended up really loving that class.
So I'm right in the middle of my postdoc, second year, and all my classes have been fantastic. I really enjoyed class that I took with Professor Hammer on women and religion. It was fantastic to be part of the class and engaging with some of the texts and the conversations around women and religion. The other one I'm currently taking is with Professor Ariel, Religion and Race in America, looking at different ethnicities and the conversation of race. And every time that I've taken a class, I found something connected to my work, which is what I enjoy a lot. And bringing into conversation what I'm working with. And because my focus is on ethnography of religion, it's with Professor Orphan. Right now it's pushing me to continue to think outside the box and critically and looking at different methodology of ethnography and so forth. So I think taking those classes are, like what Professor Lambert was saying, is always pushing me to look in a global context. And what is that force that that keeps people going and doing what they still do? Nowadays, not a lot of people talk about religion. Religion is very controversial. And yet it's a driving force. And you cannot know history without not taking religion into context. And those classes help you to engage with those critically.
Yes, I'm gonna string together a couple memories here, and some of them are gonna be, you're gonna see it, some of them are gonna be in my graduate school, which was very formative for me as well. So, if you haven't picked up my comments so far, I tend to follow people around rather than sort of ideas. So there were three people I think that were really compelling to me when I was here. Lauren Lee, because she was like personal, it felt like she was personally invested in me, in my growth, which was something that I really needed at the time. So regardless of the content we were discussing in the class, the experience was much needed at the time. I took 3 semesters in a row of CMAN's courses, and Dean brought me into his, told him I wanted to go to grad school. You probably don't remember this because you have so many students, but when I wanted to go to grad school, he said if I got my GPA, I told him my GPA was very good. He said if I could get my GPA over a 3, he would write me a letter of recommendation. I got a letter of recommendation from him, and I got my GPA over a 3, which was a feat for me at the time. And then Todd Ochoa, who's still with the program, he taught a lot about post-structuralism, which to me was the most fascinating sequence of ideas in a row that I had ever experienced. So it allowed me to play within my own faith context, which was very important to me at the time and remains important, but it was a space to do that was welcoming and open, allowed for errors, and I think that's really important as I was formulating who I wanted to become. So the second piece of that, if I can make this answer really long, is that I got my master's in theological studies at Emory University, Candler School of Theology. And I'm on the board of advisors for the dean there, that my wife and I are, so I have to put a plug in for if you're interested in seminary. I think Candler is an excellent place to go. And the reason is there were a couple very important people there, but Candler deploys a program called contextual education, which forces students out of the classroom and community. So it's a very social justice bent to it. And it's very place-based in that it draws on the strengths of Atlanta to educate the students. And so part of my education, my first semester of grad school, was to work in sort of an intern capacity at a shelter for folks experiencing homelessness. And nothing makes your religious studies more real than going out into the field and trying to act upon what you perceive to be your values. So those are a series of experiences. Many of them are in Carolina, but also
I guess I have one question left before I can open up to our high volume audience. Is there a single idea or thought that challenged you, that inspired you, that kind of stuck with you? Whether it related to your career, your personal life, that kind of from religious studies, kind of moved you and formed you in who you are today. Unless religious studies is totally uninspiring and completely boring, I get it.
Yeah, so I'll answer that by saying no, there's not a single idea, it's the culmination of lots of ideas. And the experience of narrating those ideas and understanding my own assumptions, preconditions that I brought to whether it's a certain text, a certain experience, a certain judgment, value judgment that I made on others. So the answer is no, but I think.
To a specific example,
Well, I think I've given a couple of them, so I don't wanna like belabor that point. But I do think there is a lot of value, and I'll maybe pivot to this, is that there's a lot of value as a religious practitioner of completing courses in religious studies. That is not, is as obvious as that sounds, that's not a common practice. It's not even an encouraged practice in a lot of areas. But it is interesting to think about the ideas that you hold most sacred or most dear, as Professor Lambert was talking about, would go unexplored. And so I think the ability to explore those ideas, I think is transformational.
So the community that I study, and I'm hoping I'm gonna go to do field work post-COVID, is it's a small, very small community in Mauritius. You have 1.2 million people, and there's maybe 30,000 of them who are Indian Catholics, where it's a Hindu-based dominant country, and with Africans or Creoles. So Hinduism is the first main religion followed by Catholicism. And for this community, this 20,000 people who would argue, who are not even on the census, they're not even recognized on the census in Mauritius. Why would I study? Why would I care about this community where they feel they are equally Catholic and they will equally say they are culturally Hindu, where they advocate and strongly would celebrate Diwali, a Hindu festival in the Catholic Church? Why would anyone care? And religious studies is the place where I can do that, where I can ask those hard questions, where you can see the intersection of race, ethnicity, religions, languages, and all of these complexities, engaging with them. Where is the tension? And that's the fun part. And that's what you do in religious studies. You want to go and engage with that tension. I think that's something that I'm coming to grasp as I'm going through my coursework. And the other thing that has been hitting me pretty hard this semester too is I'm taking a class, ethnography of religion, and we read Mama Lola, an ethnography about Buddhism in New York. And just engaging with this practice that is often demonized. And it's challenging my own beliefs, where I come from. And I come from a place where there's many religions and this cosmopolitan wealth and thought and so forth. And yet it's making me challenge my own biases. And I don't think I would have that in any other nice. So, yeah, that's personally where I am right now.
I think I can kind of build off last two speakers. I have a good friend from high school who just became my Catholic priest. And he said that the first couple of years of seminary, basically they spend just like completely blowing up your belief system. And he talked about how much he valued that. He studied a bunch of different religions, we were taught to just doubt everything in order to build like a solid foundation to actually grow your belief in your faith and decide what is important to you or not. Weed out people who, I guess. Related to that, I think it's all the way into my senior year as a religious studies major. We have to choose a concentration at that time. That was a religion and culture concentration. And we took some seminar, I blanked on the name of it, sorry, it was something like magic, miracles, and some alliterative word. But I want to say it was like witchcraft related. But it challenged me in a way that just learning about different cultures and religions had not yet done so. Kind of blew up my own assumptions. You know, we talk about who gets to define what is a miracle versus demonize it by calling it some sort of magic. And I hadn't really examined common stories and belief systems from my own life and from other religions through that lens yet. And that didn't happen until I think spring of senior year. So that was an important moment for me as a religious studies major.
It's the moment, I guess I'll pick you up on your challenge, the one moment. the one point. And I think for me, that came in graduate school. So I was already kind of committed to studying ancient texts. I was studying all these ancient languages, artwork. And I produced this paper on fasting in the Bible. Why do people fast? And I just had a very simple argument. I mean, people usually today, we think about fasting as part of a kind of act of repentance. It has to do with sin, it has to do with contrition, right? So it's part of a broader process of repenting. So it has to do with our inner nature. And I was interested in studying repentance. I was interested in studying narrative, actually, and the kind of narratives that we tell about ourselves over the course of our lifetime. And repentance seemed like an obvious example of that in antiquity. But I wrote this paper basically saying fasting has nothing to do with repentance in the Bible. I turned this into my advisor. And well, that was hard. It was hard before I went to school. So I didn't hear back from him for months. But finally he came back, tapped me on the shoulder. Did I ever tell you about that paper? I said, well, no. He said that's a really fantastic paper you wrote. And I was just to me that was basically devastating. Because I wrote this paper that in many ways was stepping back from the kind of interest that I had in these narratives. I wrote this paper about that, that fasting is not about repentance in the Bible. And for him, this was this fantastic piece of scholarship. And I was then left saying, like, is that it? Like, now I've reached the heights of religious studies. Like, it didn't feel meaningful to me. And that really provoked a crisis. Like, I started thinking, am I really going to continue in all of this? Do I really want it? Is this what I really want to be doing? And I went and I read a lot of different things. And I realized eventually, reading various people like Nietzsche and Foucault and others, but I realized that actually what was so exciting about what I discovered was that it did challenge the sorts of assumptions and ideas and concerns that had brought me to the study of religion in the first place. It was, in a sense, anathema. It really did go against what I was trying to accomplish. And that then made me realize that the really interesting question here was trying to understand the challenge. Why was that so challenging? Why was it so disturbing to my way of seeing the world that maybe this act of fasting didn't have to do something with this sort of inner regret, this inner contrition, this narrative about the self. And that has animated really much of my scholarship since that point. It's also made my scholarship challenging to more than a few people because they are going into religious studies in some ways seeking to confirm their ideas, seeing the Bible as a foundation for their own beliefs. And that has a certain legitimacy to it. And that's what the Bible's been doing for thousands of years. Serving, it gets reinterpreted, gets reinterpreted, gets given new readings. And so in that sense, it has served as a certain kind of foundation of sorts. But at the same time, for me, what excites me now actually is flipping it around and seeing it as something that differs from what our own assumptions might be. And as a kind of a perennial challenge, an ongoing challenge to me, to be aware of what my own ideas are, what my own assumptions are, what my own interests are, and what kind of alternative possibilities there are out there.
Thank you so much. Is there any questions that I haven't asked that need to be asked? Okay, I think I was pretty comprehensive. Great.
And thank you, Matthew, for your wonderful questions.
So I think this concludes our panel, brought to you by the Reli Student Organization. Can I get a round of applause for our panel? You're dismissed.
Thank you, guys.
Also, we're not recording.